All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here. And look, we got him back after his Euro trip. Matt Law returning to the podcast. I know we unfortunately will not get to raise a pint and celebrate the English national team's success, sadly, but we can talk about maybe how you had hopefully some good times, at least while you were going around and covering the Euros over the past few weeks.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I mean, I did a couple of these from the Euros, 5 weeks in total, so it's a long time to be away. You're right, I won't be making the tour. I'd kind of set myself a limit as if England went over 3 weeks, because I would have come home when England came home. And once England went over 3 weeks, that kind of killed my chances of getting onto the tour. Otherwise, I'd have tried to get out to the last two games. But yeah, I need to reacquaint myself with my family, my wife and kids.
Is an important part of anything. So we definitely understand. It will be unfortunate to not see you on the U.S. side of the Chelsea experience this summer, but I'm sure we'll be back in short order to see you.
Yeah, I'll be experiencing it through you guys. I'll be watching you on social media and listening in. So my way of listening into the Chelsea tour will be through you guys for sure.
Well, we'll try to deliver up some opportunities when we can. I think we're going to get into a couple of things in this episode. We're going to talk about that preseason summer tour, maybe what the general plan is. We know that where the games are happening. We know that's going to be Enzo Maresca's first game in a week from now. Basically, a week and a couple hours from this point, Chelsea will have started their preseason. We want to talk a little bit about some of the news around the front of kit sponsor and some high-level involvement trying to get that deal across the line. I do think we want to get a little bit into Enzo, not necessarily the whole situation, but how the timeline of the club may evolve, and then also talk about some transfer updates. And before we do that, we always thank our wonderful listeners for supporting the podcast. 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Always appreciate it, and it doesn't cost you anything. The same as it doesn't cost you anything other than a little bit of time to go subscribe on YouTube, hit the like button, leave a wonderful comment to talk about how cool Matt's glasses are. You also can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, the London is Blue Dispatch, and then you also could join our Discord community in a free or paid way. But Matt, turning it over to you, we have a pretty big preseason coming up. We've got another trip to the U.S. We have another multi-stop experience for the team, for the club. We have another new manager, 2 seasons in a row, who'll be leading the charge in the U.S. And I guess just from a high level, what are you understanding about Chelsea's ambition for the summer tour, both from maybe a club perspective and then also from like a footballing perspective for Maresca?
Yeah, I mean, look, from a footballing perspective, it's really, really important, clearly. Every time you get a new head coach, the preseason becomes that bit more important because obviously new style of play, new things they want to implement, first time you get to see it in games. Also the bonding experience, that's quite a big thing. Clearly the squad's kind of remained quite the same from last season, but in terms of just the bonding with the new staff and everything like that and finding out each other, it's an important process. So every time there's a new manager, I think the preseason tour steps up its significance a little bit. So I think from a football perspective, it's very important. They've got to get the preparation right. I would hope. Look, I was nervous when I saw this tour and the plan for this tour because it reminded me too much of 2 years ago, which, you guys were obviously there and it didn't go well. The planning of it, and it wasn't actually the new owner's plan, the one 2 years ago, it was the previous owner's plan, and it didn't work. The travel and how it laid out, it didn't work. We saw it in the results. We saw it in how Tuchel found it. We heard about it afterwards from players and also from Graham Potter, who told him that the players had told him it was the worst tour ever. And when I did see this tour, it made me a bit nervous because on paper, it looked quite similar, going between coasts, very long, a lot of games. It looks grueling, but I would hope that, and I would expect that there's been a lot of planning behind the scenes which mitigates the difficult factors which weren't mitigated last time, and the differences in time zones, the differences in heat, and the effect that has. So that's really important, and I hope that lessons have been learned, and I'm sure they will have been learned. I can't believe for a minute that they haven't. From that perspective, very important. From a club perspective, very, very important. Those last 2 games, Real Madrid and Manchester City, huge global games. I mean, I know in England, we look down on preseason a little bit, and we look down on the importance of preseason. But globally, and for the sort of global standing of Chelsea, the fact that they're still looking at sponsors and things like that, which, as you say, we're going to touch on later. Um, I think games like that in the US are vitally important these days. You know, those Man City and Real Madrid games. The other games are important, but I think the whole tour is probably building up to those two games, which are going to get so many eyeballs on them, and so many sponsors around them. It's ridiculous. And you know, in a PSR world, these tours are even more important as well because of the money that you can make off them. I mean, we may as well recognise that. There's no point being shy about it.
So maybe from the fact of the learning from lessons of the past, I know we saw situations last season with the pitch at Chicago and Soldier Field, the injury to Christopher Nkunku that basically took him out for the majority of the
Yeah.
season. Do you have any sense or understanding on how the club, or maybe how clubs are trying to address that, either from a player protection standpoint or how they can try to influence this? Because we also have seen some of the national team coaches talk about the pitches in the US during the
Yeah.
Copa America, and
And the
it is
pitches
still
in the
going to be a problem
Euros.
to contend with.
The pitches in the Euros as well. I don't know whether you guys are aware, but a lot of players complained about the pitches in Germany in the Euros. They were cutting up all over the place. They weren't good at all. It's an issue. I look. I'm sure clubs will say that they have detailed talks. I'm sure they do. But from what I've been told, unfortunately, going out to America is a little bit of a lottery on the pitches, and I don't mean that disrespectfully to you guys, or the events that are put on, because I've been there. They do them brilliantly. The stadiums are incredible. The fan bases, the support, always overwhelms me when I go out on these things. But the pitches have always been an issue, and no matter what clubs try and do, I think it's going to be really tough to mitigate against that. I mean, it's a little bit luck, to be honest with you. But I mean, every preseason game will have that element of luck in terms of injuries and stuff like that. You can mitigate it as much as you want, but you know, if someone goes through a player, or someone slips badly on a piece of turf, it's difficult. But yeah, I mean, that they'll be wary of that, and I'd imagine they'll manage minutes around that for sure. I mean, I think one of the big lessons from the tour 2 years ago, which I think they've got to be careful of this time, is they obviously took a really big squad 2 years ago, and then people started coming home, and it was a mess, quite frankly. And some of the teams that were put up in games in that squad were just clearly like bomb squad teams who you couldn't really see how it was a proper preparation for the season. And they obviously need to avoid that. I think it'll be quite a big squad that goes out again. Um, and they need to keep everybody involved, everybody motivated, and you know, there's no point playing bomb squad teams. But that was under Tuchel, who'd already been there. I can't imagine that a new coach would not use it for proper preparation and would do anything like, you know, like I say, that phrase bomb squads.
So, when you say big squad heading to the US, what would be your definition of what you think a good size would be, and what Chelsea's expectation around like the size of team that they're going to be bringing to the US?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all the play. I'm told, I haven't got specific dates on this, but I was told yesterday that everybody who reached a final with their national team, so that's Cole Palmer, Conor Gallagher, obviously Enzo Fernandez, who we're going to talk about for different reasons, I'm sure. I'm thinking off the
Cucurella.
top of my head here. Yeah, Cucurella, well played. Um, they're going to get as much as 3 weeks. Now, players can decide to come back a bit early, so it's hard to give a definitive on that. They have to have 2 weeks under FIFA rules, and I think they can have as much as 3 weeks. So they're not going to come back anytime before the end of the month and join the tour until then. So that will impact the numbers a little bit. But I think a lot of kids will go. A lot of players who could still leave and go out on loan will go for people to look at. So look, I don't know. I haven't really checked on the size of the squad, but I'd be surprised if it was under sort of 28, something like that. Um, but like I say, I haven't checked on that, so that is literally a bit of an off the top of my head guess. But you want a squad whereby you can almost play at least two sets of teams when you want. You can make lots of changes at half time. You can keep people fresh. You don't have to give people too many minutes, but you need to a size where people can stay motivated and stay involved. And you know, it was a mess when they were sending people home. I mean, that was like appalling for morale and appalling for the team spirit ahead of a new season.
Well, we're going to take our first ad break. When we get back, we're a little bit more conversation about preseason, who should be thinking about this as a last opportunity to impress Chelsea in the hierarchy. But stay tuned. We'll be right back. So, Matt, just wrapping a little bit on preseason, are there a group maybe of positions or a couple of players that you would call out as having this being the most important preseason of their time at Chelsea? We know there's people like Cole Palmer, regardless of when he joins up, if he joins up at all, he would have no problem to consider with this preseason. But there are players who maybe their Chelsea careers on the bubble, maybe a stay or loan situation could be decided about how they perform over the next few weeks. Like, who are those people or position groups that you're looking at are going to be the ones that you've got an eye on, or, from now to the end of it?
I think it's a huge preseason for Ben Chilwell. Huge preseason. Not because I expect him to be sold if it doesn't go to plan, because I can't really see a market out there for him. Not because of being disrespectful to him, but because the money that Chelsea would still want for him and the wages he's on, I just struggle to see a team paying that for a left back at the moment. But in terms of where his position is with the club, because he's the one player in the squad who doesn't look from the outside like he perfectly fits Maresca's system, who likes to play inverted fullbacks. We know Cucurella can do that. We know Levi can kind of do that as well in a different sort of way. And we also know they bought Vega, who I've got to be honest, I haven't seen play, but I read he can do that because he can play in midfield and at left back. So I think it's really big pre-season for Chilwell, because Cucurella's not going to be there for a lot of it because of getting to the final. And I think it's going to be his time to sort of see whether, I'm assuming from training that Maresca will have worked with him a lot and trying to work with him on how he likes his fullbacks to play. And then we'll see whether Chilwell can actually do that. Because let's face it, Chilwell has always been an out-and-out sort of left back, left wing back who plays a bit like a winger. He likes to get on the outside. He likes to get down the touchline. And that's not Maresca's style. So it's a huge one for him to show that he could fit into Maresca's style. If he can, then, the future for him and his playing sort of his playing time under Maresca might be a lot different to maybe what we all are assuming at the moment. But if it's not, if he doesn't, then wow, he could have a difficult season ahead of him. It's a big pre-season for Robert Sanchez. I've spoken on here with Nick before about the fact that they don't want to sign a new goalkeeper if they don't have to. They think that Robert Sanchez can be the Maresca prototype goalkeeper. He last season he gave me a heart attack whenever he got the ball, but the club disagree with me and think that's one of his strengths. And he's going to have to show that, because if he has a bad pre-season and the distribution doesn't go as well, they might have to rethink their whole strategy around the goalkeeper. So it's a big pre-season for him and for the club on him, because I think Ben Roberts is putting a lot of faith in him. The club are putting a lot of faith in him. And I think it will be, a small blow, shall we say, if he can't actually live up to that. And like I say, it might require then a late transfer window rethink a little bit. So big pre-season for him. And then the other one, and this sounds really harsh, and it's not because, he needs to necessarily prove anything, but Nkunku. It's a big pre-season for Nkunku because he never got fit last season. Whenever he came back, he had another problem. Whenever he came back, he had a different problem. He just never got going after that pre-season injury. So he needs a really good pre-season. Pre-season's so important to the fitness of players, and especially a player who's had a season like he had last season. And so he needs a really, really good pre-season where he comes back really fit, stays really fit. And also, we might touch on this later, but I still think Chelsea are looking for a striker. I wouldn't put huge amounts of money on at the moment the fact that they definitely will get another sort of frontline striker, as it were. And, we might see Nkunku play a couple of positions to see what he can do in this Maresca system. Someone said to me, it wasn't someone inside the club, by the way, it's someone who knows Maresca rather than a Chelsea insider, said to me that Maresca might look at Nkunku in a similar kind of way as City used to look at Gabriel Jesus, who is not what you would call an out-and-out fox-in-the-box type striker. He's more of a false nine style. He's probably never going to score 25 goals, but will always probably get you 15 goals. And having worked at City and obviously knowing Gabriel Jesus, the person who knows Maresca quite well, said that he thought he would look at Nkunku as possibly in that role and as that kind of player. So we may well see Nkunku get some sort of go in a kind, not a false nine, but an untraditional nine position, shall we say?
I mean, we did see parts of the season last year. Cole Palmer more central,
Yeah,
Nico Jackson out to the left, and so it sounds like we could see examples of that again, where we
yeah.
see, a Jackson on the left, we see an Nkunku centrally, and someone like Madueke on the right hand side as kind of a test and learn.
Jackson's an interesting one. He got an injury at the end of the season with Senegal. He had to have a scan at Chelsea, and I know he went back to Senegal for his holidays, needing to come back to be scanned. You tell me, because I've had my head down a little bit. Have you seen any preseason pictures of him yet?
I will
Because
say I've not paid a bunch of attention to the
no,
preseason photos, so we will have to let the
I
listeners and
don't.
commentators get us
Yeah,
on.
I need to probably make a check on Jackson's fitness because he did have a little injury at the end of last season. So whether he's fit for the first preseason games, we'll wait and see.
Well, that would be definitely be good to have him contributing at a high level, or if he's any concern, to put him in a box and let
Yeah,
him,
exactly.
let him recover, like in the Bacta tanks from Star Wars or something. Just make sure that he's perfectly fit to start the season. That's the most important thing. Any other players that you're looking at? I know that we've got still a pretty congested midfield kind of attack grouping as well. And I know that that's still going to be kind of some question mark areas. We know Chukwemeka is a individual who might kind of
He
be
was
think
like,
about that
yeah,
their career could be at a crossroads with Chelsea.
yeah. That's exactly when you said it. That's exactly who came to mind, Carney. Um, Again, I mentioned this on a show with Nick that I don't quite know where things stand with Carney. They've been very hard on the fact they won't loan him, although with respect to Chelsea, I've heard that before from Chelsea with Lukaku, and they ended up loaning them. So I'm always a little bit wary to take it as absolute gospel. But they certainly don't want to loan him. If they got a bid for him, I think they would have to consider it, given the amount of players they've got in those positions. But Carney would you would imagine will have the opportunity to completely change that feeling. And if he has a pre-season, Enzo Maresca, I could see him fitting in really well to an Enzo Maresca team from what I've seen and know about Enzo Maresca team. So I'd like to see Carney given a real good go in pre-season. Just look, I've got a bit of bias in this because he came from my club. I'd be very interested to see if Kellyman gets some minutes. I think the plan with Kellyman is probably to take him on pre-season, let him be part of the squad, let him get a feel for being a Chelsea player, and then maybe look at a loan towards the end of the transfer window. But there's always a kid. I've always found with every club's pre-season, there is generally a young player who slightly changes the narrative and the plan around themselves. There's usually a young player who's probably heading out or heading out on loan at the start of the pre-season who will catch the manager's eye and maybe things change for them. And I always think there's one, and maybe it can be Kellyman, maybe it can be somebody else, maybe it's just Carney, but who's not that young anymore. But I always think there's always an opportunity for a young player, to slightly change their destiny, shall I say, on a preseason tour.
Well, we'll get a chance to see that in under a week at this point in time. When we drop this on the Friday, we will, it'll be a week from actually being able to talk about a preseason result, which is a crazy thing to think about.
Oh, I
As
should
the
also
oh,
mention, sorry to interrupt you, Lavia. Completely forgot about Lavia. Massive pre-season for Romeo Lavia. Enzo's not going to be there for most of it with the getting to the final. You'd imagine that Lavia will get a good look next to Caicedo in midfield. And I've always felt that they missed his height as much as anything. I think that central midfield can be a little bit small for balls over the top. And I think Lavia potentially could be quite a difference maker in that. So I'd be really interested to see Lavia. Apologies for completely forgetting about him.
well, I mean, he did only play just over 30 minutes of football for Chelsea last season, so he can feel as if he's a forgotten man at the moment, but I'm sure he'll be hoping that is not the case this time next year. We'll be talking about him as if he had his druthers, as a regular and a strong contributor to this Chelsea side, which would be the best possible outcome for all of us. I do want to talk about another thing. We enter into a preseason tour again without a true front of kit sponsor,
Yeah,
unless you're the Chelsea women's team, because there was the specific deal with 3 for the women's team to have their own independent front of kit sponsor and training kit sponsor. So there was also some reporting that Badad Iqbali has had to like take control of this process because there's disagreements across maybe the footballing and business operations. Like, can you help us understand like where this is at? Because it seems like a mess again.
Yeah, look, that reporting's interesting because I can tell you for a fact that Badad Iqbali's always been very hands-on with the sponsorship. He's pretty much always led it. Quite honestly with you, it's a big thing of his. You know, he's obviously through Clear Lake. They're involved in a lot of business, and Badad plays a very hands-on role, not just around the team, but also definitely with the sponsor. And it's not new. I mean, it might be newly reported. I don't quite know why it became a story. If I'm quite honest with you, that Badad's got quite a grip on this. But yeah, he has. But that's not new. It's not particularly unusual. You know, just to relate it back to my team, we've just signed a deal with Adidas as the kit manufacturer. Nassif Sawiris, who's one of the owners of Villa, holds shares in Adidas. Who do you think did that deal? I mean, you know, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all. So yeah, yes, Badad is playing a very, very large part in it, probably leading it. Certainly, he's done that in the past with sponsorship deals. Look at Infinite Athlete. Look at the links business-wise Infinite Athlete had with Badad and Todd already. They clearly led that. It doesn't mean that Chris Jurasek's been pushed aside or anything like that. Chris Jurasek works for Clear Lake as well. So, you know, I I don't think that's really a big deal or really a big story. What is a big story is that they still haven't got one. Now, I did a story on this a couple of weeks ago, and this was the last I heard, that the likelihood was becoming that they would prioritise a shorter term front of shirt sponsor. Whether it be 1 year or 2 years, I don't know, but they're reluctant to get into a long term deal because obviously they are very aware that A, they expect to get back in the Champions League, and B, their negotiating position becomes much, much better when they're in the Champions League, and they're very reluctant to get tied into a deal with a company that doesn't reflect maybe Champions League standards. They've been talking to some very big companies. Riyadh Air, I think, is on record as being one of them, about, you know, front of shirt sponsors. And I don't know whether Riyadh Air is definitely one of these, but I'm told that some of those big sponsors were very keen to only engage in very long multi-year deals, and that just doesn't suit Chelsea where they are at the moment. That, I think, is where the delay has come in, because I think they could do a multi-year with quite a big company very easily at the moment, but I think they think they'd be selling themselves short for future deals. So they're trying to get the best valuation they can, I am told, on a shorter term. Now, that might change. It might be that they can negotiate a longer one that takes in various bonuses and increments with getting back into the Champions League. But I know a couple of weeks ago they thought it was more likely they would end up doing another shorter term one, 1 or 2 years, to allow them to renegotiate and put it out to tender again when they believe they'll be back in the Champions League. Actually, that to me makes sense. Look, bad optics if they start the season without a sponsor again, but I think the club would tell you that they went through it last season and it wasn't the end of the world. Fans quite liked being able to buy the kit without a sponsor again, which is probably where it's heading at the moment. They played Liverpool without a sponsor first day. So again, you'd think, well, they'd want their sponsor for Man City because it's a massive global game. Well, they started the season last season with a massive global game against Liverpool. And as I say, it didn't prove to be the end of the world, albeit I don't like it. But that's quite a traditional view, I think, probably. And probably people within Chelsea, and certainly those on the side that don't come from, you know, a traditional English football background, probably don't place the same sort of importance on it as maybe people like myself does, and even people like yourselves do, who, you know, who've been used to a certain way of doing things, let's say. But yeah, look, I think they should have it by now, but you know, they'll argue that they'll get the best deal, and the timing on it is secondary to getting the best deal.
So, other big topics that the club has to make is on what happens next with Enzo Fernandez. So we know that obviously there's a large scale club level investigation into the recording and singing of the Enzo's recording of the Argentinian national team singing racist song with also transphobic elements of the chant in there as well. And definitely seems as if there has been apology messages now from Enzo Fernandez on his social channels. There's been a division in the types of posts that players for
Mm.
Chelsea directly have made in relation to this as well. And what's your understanding on what the timeline is to make a decision? It feels like this is something the club would want to move kind of swiftly and quickly on, while also execute, working through with enough kind of careful consideration, but also, trying to balance the need to deal with the player issue, deal with how this impacts the rest of their playing organization, how this impacts the feelings of fans and supporters, and then also how this just impacts maybe the club as a whole.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So obviously Enzo put out his public apology. I wrote a report yesterday. He's also put round a private apology. They have messaging systems within the club, obviously, whether it be a group WhatsApp or whether there's some sort of other app where, club messages are put onto. I don't think we need to know specifically, but a message certainly was circulated on an official sort of club messaging app, as I think it was, whereby he apologised to the entire squad too. So that's where that stayed. Chelsea's statement, I know there was a little bit of time between, obviously, the video coming up and Chelsea putting out their own statement. Just the way of the world these days, because of the AI generated content, you may see some of those videos where they have Southgate and they AI different voices into his. They did have to actually genuinely make sure that this wasn't a case of that, and whereby I don't think anyone thought it really was, but they obviously have to get hold of the player who presumably was partying somewhere in Argentina or South America, not easy to get hold of, and B, just make sure from all sides that there's no funny business gone on with the video. So they did that. That's why maybe Chelsea's statement took a little bit longer than you might have expected. It was the morning after. I thought the statement was fine. I thought the statement was good. They've made it clear there's a disciplinary procedure. I would definitely expect there to be a fine at the very least coming Enzo's way. I would definitely expect Enzo would have to do some sort of education program, either through the club or through the FA or through FIFA, something like that. FIFA are now looking into this as well, by the way. I don't think at the moment the FA are, but the FA could get involved, and then you do run the risk of him getting a ban. But I haven't heard that yet, so we're not at that stage yet. Enzo, as we said before, isn't actually due back for, at the minimum, 2 weeks, at the maximum probably 3 weeks. I think during that time there will be a lot of sort of working out of the best way to proceed with this, and talking between the two camps. I don't expect anything to necessarily be announced or briefed in terms of what might or might not happen until he's back. So there's going to be a little bit of time there. Obviously, I think there'll be work done behind the scenes with the players who are clearly very upset with this, to gauge whether what Enzo has done so far is enough for them, or whether there's still bridges to be built, let's say. And that'll obviously be up to individuals. Some individuals may accept that he's apologised publicly and privately. We had I covered a similar situation with Tottenham when Bentancur made what was perceived to be a racist remark towards Heung-min Son, which he thought was a joke. He apologised publicly and privately to Son, and actually that was the end of it. Son accepted that. Some players may accept what Enzo's done, some players may not. We don't know. So the club will have to work through that. And it's obviously a man management issue for Enzo Maresca, which he doesn't need at this stage. I mean, it's not quite the issue it would have been if Enzo was straight back into the squad. He can again take time, maybe have some private conversations with people. The fact they're all going to be in a hotel together or several hotels together for a long time will help them have lots of time for those quiet conversations, I'm sure. And then they'll have to decide. I mean, what does interest me about this? It seems to have touched Chelsea so far, which I find a little bit surprising, because I completely accept that Enzo was the guy who filmed it, and Enzo is the guy who can't really argue against the fact that he is on film singing it. But, are we all so naive to think that there weren't other English-based players on that bus who were singing along when you could clearly hear that lots of people were singing it. Now, I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to make accusations because I don't want to get either of us into a legal problem. But I am surprised that this has only touched Chelsea and Enzo Fernandez so far. Let's put it that way. And that's probably legally as much as I'm allowed to, or we're allowed to say on that publicly.
Yeah, it does not feel like the aperture has expanded to bring in everyone who might have been involved. And I think the more important thing is figuring out how to move beyond this, how to find ways to educate, to learn, and to grow, and to hopefully use this as another opportunity to change minds and to kind of continue bringing up the bar for how we think about
Yeah,
and embrace others.
and look, I am completely against it. I think it's abhorrent. The song, I would hope that nobody would ever sing songs like that. So I am not justifying it in the slightest. Do I think these guys are actually racist and homophobic? I don't know, but my guess would be probably not. But they need educating about the power of their words and songs and the pack mentality. And I think that's probably where this lies.
Well, we are going to leave that conversation at this point because there's still more that we're going to need to hear from the club, from the player, and the players about where we go next. But we're going to take our last ad break. When we get back, we're going to dive into some last conversation around what's going on with the transfer market. It has been a quieter summer than we have been used to under Clear Lake Capital, but maybe there's some stuff that still will be done between now and the end of the transfer window. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. So, Matt, you mentioned it earlier in the episode, and it's one of the things people love to tune in for is what is Chelsea going to do next in terms of signings? You mentioned this idea of a striker. We know a winger has been on the radar. We know that you mentioned goalkeeper, but I don't think we need to get to that point yet. That's probably a conversation for future weeks based upon where Sanchez and Petrovic are at the, maybe halfway through preseason. So, talk to us about incomings. Talk to us about maybe any business that you think Chelsea might still be trying to get done between now and the end of the window.
So now beyond the end of window, they're still looking for a striker and a right-footed winger for sure. But it's not. It's not. It is an active search, but it's not what I would call a fast-paced or desperate search at the moment. I think there is a feeling of putting their foot on the ball, having made some squad adjustments. I think they know there is now a need to sell a few players or work out who's being sold, who's going on loan, and get the squad numbers down a little bit. Because if everyone was to be back and this was to be the first day of the season, the first team squad would be huge again, and so they need to work through that a little bit. And I also think there's a sense that a few things are starting to happen in the market. Man United are signing a defender, Villa are signing a Nana, which has obviously impacted the Gallagher interest from their point of view. And I think there is a sense, having spoken to someone yesterday, of letting the market just shake down a little bit. A few things happen, and seeing where that lies. United have just signed Zerki as well. Is that going to affect the striker market on other places? So there's a willingness to let the market sort of settle down, see where things are, start pre-season, and revisit. Now, if an opportunity comes up quickly, I'm sure they'll be ready to go. But I think they're happy to start pre-season now and take a view on the winger and the striker as they sort of go along. Like I said, I don't get the impression, although they might surprise me, that it's currently a very fast-paced search on either of those two positions. And I would expect maybe a few outs before we get a couple of ins.
And in terms of outs, maybe who do you feel like at this point is the closest to that next step in their kind of footballing journey?
Yeah, closest is a difficult one. I mean, Gallagher's really interesting because I never felt that anything was going to happen with Gallagher while the Euros was on. Gallagher's now got 2 to 3 weeks off after playing for England. You would have thought this is the time that would suit all parties to start really talking, because it would be awkward if he has to come back, if he is going to go, or if he has to come back with his future up in the air. So the next 2 or 3 weeks could be quite key to Gallagher. I've just written an article that's going to drop on probably before this podcast drops, that Atletico Madrid have come in for more talks on Gallagher in the last few days. But there is a lot of scepticism over whether Atletico will be able to get anywhere close to the numbers that Chelsea and Gallagher would want to make it tempting. They haven't made a bid, but there have been new talks. Atletico in the last week or so have shown the most interest. Tottenham seem to be taking a back seat. I suspect, and this is a guess, having covered Tottenham a long time, that Tottenham's strategy will be to let the transfer window go a lot later before actually making a move for Gallagher, because I think that's where they would see they'd be able to get some value for him. Chelsea still value him at 50 million. The Villa thing obviously is gone. They've gone for Onana. I slipped into a piece I did a couple of weeks ago, and I might have mentioned it to Nick, that there'd become a feeling around Gallagher after Villa sort of made their interest clear to him, that Gallagher didn't jump at it, let's say. He wasn't not interested in it. I think he was pretty respectful of it, but he wasn't going to jump at it. And Villa wanted to get their business done. They wanted a midfielder to go on tour with them. They wanted it done after Luiz had gone. So they pivoted to their other top target, who was Amadou Onana. And that is the end of Villa's interest in Gallagher. So they're no longer there. So the two clubs we now know about are Atletico and Tottenham. Atletico, I don't know whether they can get the funds together. Tottenham, I expect to wait. So it could run. But I think the next 2 or 3 weeks could become interesting. Trevor Chalobah, keep talking about him. Will Trevor Chalobah prove to another manager that he's one of the best defenders in the club and that everybody's wrong about him? Or will a club come in for him? There's a lot of clubs interested in Chalobah, but I always get the impression with Chalobah, and I think this is also bad from the clubs who are interested in, that he's always sort of number 2 on a lot of lists rather than number 1. But yeah, watch for Chalobah. And then the others are people we know now. Broja, I think, is definitely going to try and get a move. Sure. I always forget people in these. Casadei for sure. Datro Fofana, I think, will move either permanently or on loan. There's so many players at Chelsea. There will be one that either you mention or I come off and I think, damn, why didn't I mention that guy? I should always come with a list of them. But yeah, look, there's nothing I know about pending, but again, something could crop up in the next 24, 48 hours before they go off for pre-season.
One of the things that, is not in vogue, but it's something that people like to dream up because of the way we think about Football Manager or playing, EAFC or FIFA, is this idea of, clubs have interest in players that each other has. I mean, we've expressed interest. Chelsea has in Samu from Atletico Madrid. If Atletico Madrid is looking at Conor Gallagher, does that potentially make the situation come alive, even if there's not as much in terms of a transfer fee?
Well, look, it's prudent you bring that up, because Atletico and Chelsea have been in talks all summer about various things. And one of them is definitely Samu. And obviously, as I've just said, one's Connor. So, and we do know trades are incredibly rare, but what we keep now seeing is these deals between clubs where it's separate deals, and one player moves for one fee and one player moves for the other fee, and it kind of ends up working out for everybody because of all financial fair play and PSR. So yes, I would think it probably is helpful that those two clubs are already in talks about things. The only thing, Samu is definitely, if Chelsea could sign Samu easily, I think they'd have already signed him, because he is definitely near the top, if not the top of their transfer targets. They really like this lad, and he really ticks a lot of boxes for them. So if there could be a deal done there, which saw Gallagher go in one deal and Samu come in another, then possibly. The only thing I would say is the valuation of Samu so far from Atletico has been an awful lot bigger than Chelsea's valuation. And the player himself keeps saying he wants to stay and fight for his place at Atletico, because apparently Simeone keeps telling him he's going to get chances. And obviously Morata has now gone. I think they're signing the Ukrainian striker and possibly another striker. But yeah, those two clubs are talking about things, and previously that has helped Chelsea do deals. We've seen it with Villa already.
And then, so maybe as we kind of wind down, because your piece dropped while we were talking, in this episode, but maybe as good as a new signing is keeping some of your best players happy and at the club for a very long time. What can you tell us about how the club want to make Cole Palmer a very, very happy Chelsea player with a updated contract to maybe recognize his value to the club?
Yeah. So I didn't realise this piece had dropped while we're talking, actually. But yes, so that's got the Conor Gallagher information in as well, further down it. But yes, so Cole will be rewarded for his performances for Chelsea and also his performances for England. He scored in the final of a European Championship. He assisted in the semi-final of a European Championship. He should have played a lot more than he did, quite frankly.
Yes.
So Cole will get rewarded. What won't happen, from what I'm told, is there won't be a big announcement and song and dance made about it. He signed a 7+1 contract, so he's got 6+1 years left already. They don't need to announce a new contract. He will simply get contract adjustments made privately. But that will happen. And I'm told they want to keep him for 10 years. And if you're going to keep him for 10 years, you're not keeping him on 10 years on 75 grand to 80 grand a week. Absolutely zero chance. So that wage, if he carries on, is just going to get incremented and incremented and incremented. Tottenham used to do it on Gareth Bale. Very similar thing. Tottenham every summer would do it on Gareth Bale. I think it happened with Harry Kane at Tottenham as well. Every so often they would announce a 1-year extension, but pretty much every summer their wages would change and they would get an adjustment, just like, people can get in their jobs. You pretty much remain on the same contract, but you just get a wage adjustment and an adjustment made to your current contract. So yeah, that's what's going to happen on Cole Palmer. Don't expect to see big contract announcements and everything made public, but probably do rest assured that he is being rewarded for his good form.
Well, there are plenty of times where Chelsea fans have been rightfully able to criticize how we spent money on certain players or contracts, but I don't think there is going to be any question or concern that more money going to Cole Palmer to keep him happy for a recognition, as you mentioned, not just for Chelsea, but for England. No one's going to have an issue with that. So I think we all feel good about that type of deal. I think that's going to do it for this one. I think we've covered all of our bases. We know what's going on with Chelsea. We know that preseason is less than a week away. And boy, oh boy, we're going to have to start assessing matches again, Matt.
It's frightening. I've been assessing matches for the last 5 weeks. My season literally hasn't finished yet. It is not finished yet. So it is very odd, but I am going to take some time off. So I will be watching some of the preseason stuff from afar with a very interested eye. And yeah, it's frightening how fast these things come on. We've also managed to do a whole episode without talking about the kit. What do you think about the kit?
It's not good.
So, see, I generally don't like kits a lot of the time. And then I remember that they're not for 45-year-old me. And therefore it's probably good that I don't love them because they're aimed at people much cooler and younger than me. And B, I generally find that I prefer them once the players start wearing them anyway.
Sure.
I generally find that a lot of kits, my default is I don't like this kit. And then the players start wearing them and they're in matches and I'm like, this kit's fine now. Could that be the case with this kit?
It could be. The away kit is better than the home kit.
Okay. Has the away kit been officially released?
Officially or footballheadlines.com?
I've seen the leaks. I've seen the leaks. The white one, right? The sort of creamy white one. Yeah, that does look nice. I'm again not aimed at me, and it will look much better on the pitch, and the kids will like it. But I don't like the badge on that one. It's like an orange version of the badge. But yeah, it's always interesting to see the reaction to the kits. I mean, I've got to say, when I first saw the leak of the home kit, I assumed it was wrong and assumed it was a training top rather than an actual kit. But I'm always intrigued by the remarks. And funny enough, before we go, I would say that generally the kits that are most hated to start with become the cult kits. They become the kits that in time people talk about and they want. They become like a cult item of leisure wear and of kit collectors. So maybe this will end up becoming a cult kit. And you have to be careful how you say cult kit.
Yes, hopefully this is just the stepping stone to a Jordan brand deal next year for future years, where Chelsea get back into the Champions League, can carry the right type of international recognition they need to have a very exclusive and more fashion based relationship with Nike, but specifically the Jordan brand, which would be very interesting, I think, from a Chelsea supporter fan perspective. But we don't know if that's going to be the case. There's a whole season of football to play to figure out if that's going to take place. And that is happening very, very soon. But we hope that you enjoy your holiday. We appreciate the updates, Matt, and we'll get back with you after you've had a chance to get a little R&R. But that's going to do it for this episode. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.